Hello and welcome to Beginning Photography. My name is Mr. York from Chaparral Middle School's Digital Video Production Program. Thank you so much for joining me. This is lesson 1, and this series actually starts with equipment. If you're looking for something more specific to settings, that's actually later on in the series. Feel free to skip to that lesson that teaches you what you would like to learn. Don't forget that at the end of this lesson there are questions to be answered, and the answers to those questions will come in the form of review at the beginning of the following lesson. This first lesson is really an introduction in which I'm going to be talking about terminology and a brief history of photography as it relates specifically to Lesson 2's subject of sensor size. This lesson will lead directly into Lesson 2, where I talk more about sensor size and cropped sensors versus full frame. I want to talk about the difference between video versus still pics and how both of those sort of fit underneath the umbrella of photography in general. Almost all cameras shoot video. So I'll be talking about how some of those features overlap with what we consider photography settings throughout this series, because video is an important feature of photography. Remember that video these days is simply your camera stringing together still images. If I say that I'm someone who shoots mainly video, then there's still a chance that I'm a great still photographer. Both video and still pics are pretty much under the umbrella of photography. Now, personally, I'm a photographer that also shoots video. Technically, I started both about the same time, but everyone's journey is different. I know video guys that are excellent still photographers, and I know excellent photographers that don't want to have anything to do with video or what we call nonlinear editing. The best photographers I know of spend so much time doing post-processing on their still images and do really complicated things. They probably could do video just as easily. It's just a matter of where their passion lies. As an example, the title Director of Photography on a movie set is the head of the camera and lighting crews on that set, and also selects the camera's lenses and filters to be used on any particular shoot. So obviously, saying that you are a photographer in no way says that you cannot also shoot video. That's how related the two mediums are. If someone asks me what I do, I tell them I'm simply a photographer, even though some years I get paid more to shoot video, and other years it's been all still picture work. Lately it's video, but when I shoot video, I typically use a DSLR camera and not a dedicated video camera. And if you want to make professional looking videos, you pretty much have to understand photography functions and settings and how they relate to shooting video, which uses the same photography functions with slightly different settings. Being a teacher of photography for many years, I have had to use several different brands and models and make do with what was available. Photography as a concept was invented almost 200 years ago. Digital photography began to develop in the late 1950s, but due to price, most people didn't get involved in it until about the turn of the century. And by that I mean the 2000s. Earlier cameras were more like mechanical marvels, whereas cameras today are more like handheld computers. The name photography itself is pretty much Greek and means drawing with light, and I think it's important to remember that that's all you're doing when you're taking a picture. You're just drawing with light. The thing you're drawing on is either film or a computer sensor. Computer sensors look like this. In a mirrorless camera, there's no mirror assembly to get in the way, and so you can see the sensor right there. Please don't touch it. Back in the earliest days of photography, around 1912, a German man by the name of Oskar Barnack doubled the standard size for cinema film and developed the first still photography camera that used this new 35mm format for his company called Leica, which is still around today and one of the best manufacturers of cameras. The aspect ratio of 35mm film is 2:3. 35mm film became the standard, and every function you have on your new digital camera is related to the original settings of film cameras all those years ago. If you had a single lens reflex camera, it was 35mm. Sometimes this was known as small format, in contrast to medium and large format film cameras. But today we know it as what's called full frame. Now there is such a thing as a medium format digital camera. The Swedish camera company Hasselblad makes one, and that would be an example of a camera with a sensor size larger than 35mm, which is possible. I don't want you to think it's not possible to have a film size or a sensor size larger than 35mm, even though that is the standard. If you grew up in the 80s, your parents may have had a point and shoot camera like this one here. This Nikon takes 35mm film and you just put it in the back of the camera like this. There's no sensor because you're drawing light on the film. In fact, if you had one of these point and shoot disposable cameras, there's 35 millimeter film inside of this. When we took it to processing, we would take the whole thing and just put it in the envelope. If your parents didn't have a camera like this, they may have had a Polaroid Instamatic, a 110 format camera, or a Kodak disc camera. Those are not 35 millimeter and not comparable to what we consider full frame cameras today as far as the sensor size. Well, that was a lot of fun, and I hope you learned something. I'm going to stop at this point and continue this discussion on the difference between cropped versus full frame sensors in lesson 2. Let's see how much you paid attention in this lesson. In today's lesson, we talked about the problems with terminology and how ambiguous the terms for shooting video and still pics are. Okay, question number 1. If I say I'm a photographer, does that mean I don't shoot video? Question number 2. If I tell you I shoot video, does that mean that I don't know how to also take great still pics? Question number 3. The DP on a movie set is responsible for A. Video cameras, B. Lighting, C. Still images, or D. All of the above, including lens choice. And finally, number 4. What is the standard size photography frame for both digital and film? After you're done answering those questions, please go on to lesson 2, where I'll be continuing this discussion on the differences between full frame versus crop sensors.